What's up guys, I'm Sarah Weaver and today is True Crime Tuesday. Now, if you don't know what True Crime Tuesday is, it is a day where I do my makeup, get ready for my day, and tell you guys a true crime story at the same time. I know, it's crazy, right? So today's story is going to be on the serial killer John Wayne Gacy, and this one is twisted just like the last one, but in a little bit of a different way. So buckle your seatbelts as usual. Safety first, okay? Safety first. That's what I'm all about. I don't know. So let's get into it. Cue that cheesy intro music, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so I'm gonna start off with some primer first, and I'll leave everything that I'm using in this video on my face. I'll leave it all below in the description box, so you can just check that out if you're curious. If you're curious on anything that I'm using in here. I feel like it's just a little bit distracting when I stop and try to tell you guys what I'm using on my face while I'm telling this story, so we're just gonna do it that way, okay? So, today we're talking about John Wayne Gacy. He was born in 1942. Just gonna get my hair out of the way. John was the second of 3 children. He had 2 sisters, one older than him and one younger. All of the Gacy children were raised Catholic, and they attended Catholic school growing up. They all lived on the north side of Chicago, Illinois, and they kind of grew up in a suburban neighborhood, you know, middle class, just kind of lived a normal life, I guess you could say. Now, in school, Gacy was a pretty normal kid. He was described as, you know, not having a ton of friends, not being the most popular kid in school, but he definitely had friends. He was in Boy Scouts and things like that, school activities, so he wasn't a total loner or anything. So everything was pretty normal about Gacy's childhood, except for the fact that him and his father did not have a good relationship at all. Actually, his father really didn't have a good relationship with any of their family members. He was actually an alcoholic, and he would abuse their mother as well as the kids. I don't know about the daughters so much, but it definitely said that he abused Gacy and the mom physically. Gacy's father also liked to name call him and tell him that he was not very masculine. He would call him sissy and things like that, and a wuss, and he would tell him that, you know, you're gonna be gay when you grow up and things like that because, you know, you need to be more manly and blah blah blah. And that really affected Gacy, but you could tell that he still wanted his father's approval, just like any kid, you know? It's like, what can I do to please you? What can I do to stop this abuse? So later on, John's in high school, and he gets to his senior year and ends up moving school 4 times in his senior year. And by the time he's about to graduate, he drops out of school. It was said that him and his father had a horrible fight, and his father either kicked him out. Some stories say kicked him out. Other stories say that John just ran away and they didn't know where he went. And he ended up going to Las Vegas. So when Gacy went to Vegas, he had a kind of an odd job as a janitor at a funeral home. He was there for about 3 months, and then he decided, you know what, I need to save money and go back home because I don't like it here. I want to be back with my family. So Gacy saves up enough money, goes back to Chicago, and this is when he enrolls himself in a business school. He goes to college, and after he graduates, he gets a job at a shoe company as a sales manager. So not too long after he started this job at this shoe company, he got promoted and he was transferred to a men's clothing outlet in Springfield, Illinois. In September 1964, Gacy met a coworker and married her that same year. Her name was Marilyn Myers, and her parents actually owned a string of KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants, so they were pretty well off. And Marilyn's father ended up wanting Gacy to manage one of his KFC restaurants. So their family's restaurants were in Waterloo, Iowa. So Gacy and his wife ended up moving out there and he started working at this KFC. Not too long after they moved, Gacy and his wife had their first two children. Well, their only two children. They had a boy and a girl. And during this time, the Gacys really had every reason to be happy and just excited about life and everything starting, this new life in Iowa. Marilyn enjoyed volunteering and, staying home with the kids while John would go to work, and he also volunteered in the community as well. So they just had a happy little life together and things were going great. But as we all know, when things seem too good to be true, most of the time they are. So this is where things kind of start to get sticky for Gacy. So rumors began to spread about Gacy's sexual preference. Some thought that he might be a homosexual, and it seemed like he was partial to the younger boys that worked with him at these KFC restaurants. It also was said that he actually made passes at some of these boys that worked for him. And a lot of people who knew Gacy kind of just refused to believe these rumors. They just couldn't understand that somebody so likable and, someone they thought they knew so well could do something like that. So they kind of just put it out of their minds until 1968, when rumors became truths. In 1968, he was actually indicted by a grand jury in Blackhawk County for allegedly committing an act of sodomy on a teenage boy named Mark Miller. Miller told the courts that Gacy actually had tricked him into being tied up when he was visiting Gacy's house about a year prior. And he had said that Gacy had violently raped him while he was tied up. Of course, Gacy denied all of the charges against him and actually tried to say that Mark wanted to have sexual relations with him and that he actually was doing it to get more money out of Gacy. Then it turned out that Miller's charges weren't the only ones that Gacy was going to have to face. 4 months later, Gacy was charged with hiring a boy to beat up Mark Miller. This boy's name was Dwight Anderson, and he was 18 years old, and he was offered $10 and $300 to pay off the rest of his car loan if he would go beat up Mark Miller. During the assault, Miller actually fought back and he was able to get away from Anderson, and he broke his nose and was able to escape. So Miller called the police after the incident, and Anderson was picked up and charged for the assault of Mark Miller. So after the assault, Miller ended up calling the police, and they went and picked up Anderson, who told them all about how Gacy had basically bribed him to beat up Mark Miller. So then they went over to Gacy's house to talk to him. A judge then ordered Gacy to go under psychiatric evaluation at several mental health facilities in order to find out if he was mentally competent to stand trial for this crime. Upon evaluation, he was found to be mentally competent. However, Soon after health authorities submitted this paperwork, Gacy actually ended up admitting to the sodomy crimes against Miller. So after he admitted that he was guilty, the judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison at the Iowa State Reformatory for Men. At this time, Gacy was actually only 26 years old. Shortly after Gacy entered prison, his wife divorced him and she took the 2 kids with her. And at this time, Gacy was so mad at her that he told her that he didn't want to see her or the kids ever again. He was just like, take them away and I never want to see either of you again. So goodbye, you know? Which I'm sure she was like, all right, fine, like, no problem here. You're committing, these nasty sodomy crimes with these young boys. Like, I don't want any part of you, and neither do my kids. So, see you later, or see you never. So, while Gacy was in prison, he had very good behavior. He didn't get into any trouble, anything that could prevent him from getting out on parole when the time came up. And 8 months later, it was actually time for his parole, and he got out. So he was only in prison for a 10-year crime, or 10-year sentence, and he got out in 8 months. Like, that's just so ridiculous to me. So another thing that happened while Gacy was in prison was his father actually passed away from cirrhosis. And I'm guessing because he was an alcoholic, cirrhosis affects your liver, and that's what he ended up dying from. So when Gacy got home, he was very sad, very distraught by this, very depressed, and he just really needed to take time to get over this loss. He also felt like his father died before Gacy could even get his approval or anything. So he just felt like he had a lot that went unsaid between him and his father, and that really bothered Gacy. So at this time, Gacy ends up moving in with his mom, and he lives in her house and gets a job as a chef in a local restaurant. He only did that for about 4 months, and then he decided that it was time to go out on his own again, and he ended up getting his own place with his mother's help, and I think his sister's help also. And he ended up buying a little house just outside the city limits of Chicago. Gacy was only in his new house for about 8 months before he got charged with another crime. And this time it was for disorderly conduct. Charges stated that Gacy picked up a young boy at a bus terminal and forced him to commit sexual acts on him. But somehow Gacy managed to slip through the system once again, and when the time came for the trial, he got off because the boy who was charging him didn't show up for trial. So they just threw the case out of court, and Gacy went back to his normal life again. What do you know? On June 1st, 1972, Gacy ends up marrying Carol Hoff, who is a newly divorced mother of 2 daughters, and she's also an old friend of the family's, well, of his sisters, and they grew up together, and so he kind of had known her from the past, and I guess they ended up, getting together and getting married. Now, you're probably wondering if she was aware of his past and his prison experience and all of that, and she actually was, which shocked me because I thought there's no way that she would get involved if she knew about all of that, but she must have still loved Gacy despite all of that, or he lied to her and, said those things weren't true, I don't know. I can't think of really any reason why he would get involved with someone like that, but here we are. So Carol and her girls move into Gacy's house. At this time, Gacy became the life of the neighborhood. He was said to be, the salesman type of personality where he just could get along with anybody, and he really just kind of smoothed all the neighbors and got them to kind of fall in love with him, if you will. So he would have his neighbors over to the house all the time, and they would have parties, big elaborate parties. It was said to get up to 100 people sometimes at these parties, which is crazy to me. I mean, he only had a ranch style house. It wasn't like a mansion or anything like that, so pretty crazy. Party animal. However, when these people would come over to Gacy's house, they would complain of a weird stench that was coming from the crawl space below his house. When they would complain to Gacy about the smell, he would just tell them that it's mold from the dampness in the crawl space. And they believed him, because why would anyone assume that there's dead bodies down there? I wouldn't think that, but So in 1974, Gacy decided it was time to go in business for himself. And he's like, I have these connections now, I'm a great salesman, I should just be in business for myself. So he wanted to go into construction, and he hired a lot of young boys to work for him, young high school kids that could be paid lower wages, and he would tell people, I can pay them less and they are more willing to learn than some of these older guys, so, it works out for me. However, obviously that was not the only reason that Gacy was hiring these boys. He was also trying to seduce them, trying to, sleep with them, whatever he could get, really. And he started kind of getting sloppy with this, and people kind of started to notice that he had these homosexual desires, and that he was, kind of flirting with these boys, or, at least paying them a little too much attention. And not only were other people noticing it, but his wife was also noticing it. So by the time 1975 rolled around, Carol and Gacy had kind of drifted apart, especially in their sex life. And Gacy really showed no sexual interest in Carol anymore, and that really hurt Carol's feelings. But what actually ended up paining her even more is she found a bunch of homosexual porn magazines laying around their house. And even though she knew that Gacy was reading them, she knew they were his, she confronted him with it, and he just kind of acted nonchalant about it, like, oh, yeah, I mean, I'm into that, that should be okay with you, don't judge me, whatever. And Carol was like, hello, that's not okay. I'm your wife, and I don't want my husband doing those sorts of things. So they got into an argument about this, and Gacy actually told her that he preferred boys as opposed to women. So it didn't really take Carol much longer after that to decide to file for divorce. And their divorce became final in March of 1976. Now, of course, Gacy didn't let this interfere with his life. He kept, going about his life, doing his own thing, and he really just actually became more involved in the community and really was just unaffected by Carol leaving him at all. Gacy ended up becoming even more of a volunteer in the town they lived in, and he would actually dress up as a clown. And I'll show you guys a picture because it's so freaking crazy looking. I might have put it in the thumbnail as well, but he just looks insane to me. If you've seen American Horror Story and you know that clown in there, that honestly, Maybe that's supposed to be him. I don't know. But it looks just like that clown in American Horror Story. It's freaky. Freaky. Also, he named himself Pogo the Clown. I mean, Pogo? Like, ugh. I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate it. So, not too long after all of this clown stuff happened and the divorce happened, rumors started to swirl even more about Gacy and his homosexuality. Rumors actually ended up growing even more true when 16-year-old Tony Antonucci claimed that Gacy had made sexual advances toward him. But Antonucci said that Gacy ended up backing off when he tried to threaten to hit him with a chair. So I guess he ended up getting away. Gacy kind of joked about the situation and just said that he was joking around, like, Tony's blowing it out of proportion. I wasn't going to do anything. I would never harm someone like that, and blah, blah, blah. So after that incident, Gacy left him alone for about a month until one night when Antonucci was over at Gacy's house. He tried to force Antonucci into handcuffs, but I guess when he put the handcuffs on him, he didn't get them on tight enough on one of his wrists, and he was able to slide out of the handcuffs when Gacy wasn't looking. After he slid out of the handcuffs, he ended up grabbing Gacy by his legs and flipping him on his back, and he basically put the handcuffs onto Gacy, and the roles were reversed. At this point, Gacy's on the ground. He's kind of like laughing it off, like, oh, you got me, haha, like, it was just a test. I was just trying to see, if you would pass, and you did, and, congratulations, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, all right, man, just let me out of the handcuffs. Like, we're cool, right? So Antonucci was like, if I let you out of these, you have to promise to never touch me again. And Gacy was like, yeah, whatever, just let me out, I promise. So Gacy actually never ended up making any sexual advances toward Antonucci again. And Antonucci ended up working for him for a whole year after that incident happened. And, I guess he needed the money that bad that he just stayed around. Over the next few years, several more boys would go missing in the area, and police were at a loss for what happened to them. Until one night when 15-year-old Robert Piest went missing outside of a pharmacy after he had just gotten off work there that night. His mother had come to pick him up, and she was supposed to meet him right outside. And he told her, I gotta go talk to this guy really quick. He offered me a job with his construction company, but let me just go talk to him and I will be right back. So his mom's waiting, and there's no sign of her son coming back. So his mom starts to get worried, and she eventually calls the police and tells them, like, I can't find my son. He said he was going to meet with this guy about a contracting job, and he never came back. And she waited about 3 hours till she called police to tell them this. So after they learned the name of the contractor that the boy was going to meet with, they ended up going to the guy's house. And what do you know, Gacy ends up answering the door. So, they ask him, have you seen this boy? Can you give us any information on where he might be? We know, you were the last person that supposedly saw him. So they end up taking Gacy to the police station to do further questioning on him. So even when he went down to the police station, Gacy still told police that he knew nothing about the situation or about the boy's whereabouts. But Detectives must not have believed him for some reason, and when they ended up looking into Gacy's background, they saw that he had those sodomy charges on his record. So they decided that they would look into him and really figure out what was going on here. So at this time, the detective was able to get a search warrant for Gacy's house, and they really thought that they would find either Robert Piest there or at least some evidence that he was in Gacy's house that night. So during the search of Gacy's house, they would find some things that actually ended up belonging to some of these missing boys in town. They also confiscated homosexual pornography that they found. They found handcuffs, ropes, ties, all kinds of things, as well as sex toys, dildos, all that stuff. They also found a section of blood-stained carpet that he was keeping there. Another thing they ended up finding was marijuana and Valium. They also found hair in the trunk of one of his cars. Gacy had 3 cars, and they searched all of them, but the only hair they found was in the trunk of one of the cars. And they would later find out that it actually did belong to Piest. Police also noticed that weird odor that was coming from the crawl space of Gacy's house. However, when they looked under the house, they didn't find anything weird, so they just ended up leaving it alone. The only thing that they noticed was that there was some lime dust actually sprinkled over the top layer of soil in the crawl space, which they thought was weird, but Gacy had just said that it was to collect moisture that had built up down there. So then the police called Gacy in for questioning, and he refused to answer any of their questions. So with nothing to arrest Gacy at this time, they had to let him go, and they kept him under a 24-hour surveillance. Now, in the following days, the police would investigate and talk to many of Gacy's friends and neighbors that knew him well and could give them more information on him. And even though friends and neighbors spoke so highly of him, they were able to give some information about Gacy and Piest's relationship. Whatever they said must have sparked something in the police to make them want to look into him even more. At this time, they actually ended up arresting Gacy on charges of marijuana and Valium possession. And I think they just wanted to have a reason to keep him off the streets and, keep him from running and committing any more crimes, honestly. So while they investigated this further, they had Gacy under arrest. So during this time, they actually were able to do more lab work on all of the things that they collected from Gacy's house. And one of the items that they found in the house was a class ring, and they found that it belonged to a boy named John Sick, I think is how you say his name. And John had actually disappeared a year earlier. They also discovered that 3 of Gacy's employees had gone missing recently as well. This made police realize that the case they had on their hands was a lot bigger than they had ever thought originally. So it wasn't long until investigators came back to Gacy's house and they were like, we need to dig through this place and we need to look for more evidence and proof of these crimes. During this time, Gacy actually ended up confessing that he did kill someone in his house, but he did it in self-defense. He said that he buried the body underneath the garage in his house and even gave them a little map of where it was buried so they could go look for it. Alright guys, so this is cool. My camera just decided to shut off halfway to the end of me telling this story, so now I'm going to just read the rest of this to you and I'll just kind of tell you what happened after they went looking for more evidence. They searched Gacy's house and Gacy was like, okay, I admit I did kill someone in self-defense. So the police go to his house and they're like, you know what, we're not gonna look in the garage first. Let's go down and check out that crawl space below the house that was smelling funky before, and let's see what we find down there. So they get down there and they find a mound of dirt, and they're like, this is suspicious, right? So they go down and they check out the dirt. They start digging, and of course they end up finding the remains of a body. Now, after they find this body, they end up finding 27 more bodies that were buried in this crawl space. At this time, Gacy just confesses. He's like, you know what, you're right. There are bodies down there, aren't there? And he tells them, you know, this is how I used to kill people. This is how I was luring them into my house. And he would somehow get handcuffs on them. He would either muffle their screams by shoving underwear down their throat or socks. Then he would take a rope and tie it around their neck and choke them to death. He would rape them, torture them, whatever he wanted to do to them, and then he would bury their bodies in the crawl space beneath his house. And Gacy even admitted to keeping some of the bodies in his attic after he killed them for a couple days. He would just leave them there, and then he would eventually bury them. So I don't know if I said this already, but the police end up finding 27 bodies buried in this crawl space, and 3 more bodies turned up that were found in a river nearby. And Gacy said that he would take the bodies to the river and dump them over the side of this bridge. And that's how those bodies got there. During Gacy's trial, he ended up pleading insanity, saying that he wasn't in the right mind when he committed these crimes, and there's something wrong with him, blah, blah, blah. But after about 60 or more witnesses came to the stand and gave their testimony, he ended up having no leg to stand on. So Gacy ended up being found guilty of the death of 33 young boys. And at the time, that had been the most murders committed by anybody in America. Gacy received the death penalty, and he was executed by lethal injection in 1994. His last meal was fried shrimp, fried chicken, and French fries and strawberries. Alright guys, thanks for hanging out with me for a little while today. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will see you guys back here next Tuesday. If you like this video, please subscribe. Please leave a like and a comment below. I'd love to talk to you guys, get to know you more. And if you have any suggestions for video ideas or anything like that, leave those down there as well. And I think that's all I have to tell you guys. So I will see you guys next week. Bye!